Welcome back to Impactology Live. Our next guest is Mark LeBusque. MarkLeBusque.com was born from 25 plus years of working in environments where good work had the potential to become great work, but something was missing. The missing ingredient was the addition of a real human element where belonging and purpose intersected with truth and authenticity. Mark's work helps humans to do this, and he assists organisations to embrace a more authentic way of being in order for the doing to occur. With experience across a wide range of areas, from the floor to the boardroom, in operations, customer service, sales, human resources, general management and education, Mark has a unique ability to get underneath the noise and find the truth in order to allow individuals and organisations to make progress. I had the pleasure of meeting Mark in Nashville, of all places, in the US, when we could travel. And it was through Mark's work, particularly the two books that he's authored, that's where our association started. So Mark is the author of two awesome books, Being Human and The Little Book of Human. Mark, welcome to Impactology Live.
George and Rita, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
We're really looking forward to having a chat with you and sharing that, and thank you for being here. Mark, your book covers have a little image on there. I'm not going to give it away until we flash them up, but can you tell us a little bit about you, and we'd love to know a little bit more about Frankie.
Okay, so a little bit about me, maybe background. Grew up in the country, so country Victoria, Mildura. Went off to teachers college and became a primary school teacher, so teaching 5 to 11-year-old kids. Only lasted for about 2 years in that, and just found it really, really challenging. To love the work with the kids, didn't like the toxicity of the staff room. So I joined a logistics company from the ground floor upwards. So, driving trucks, loading planes, and then progressed my way through into customer service, sales, and into those sorts of environments, and eventually into managing people. So over 20 odd years, had moved from a career of, I guess, teaching and helping people to learn to what I do today, which I think is the same thing, just with older humans now, which is running a business which is about helping managers to understand the importance of becoming more human. So I feel like I've almost gone the full circle from teaching young kids to now teaching adults around things like leadership.
And Mark, when or what point in your career, I guess, did you realise that you wanted to really inspire others when it came to different practices around leading teams? What was it that made you pivot, I guess, into that kind of work?
Look, really good question. I think if I reflect back on it, I think it happened quite a few times. There were times when I'd get a promotion, whether into supervisory role or into a higher level role, and just think this is the time where I should change the way I go about what I do. I'd been like most people. I'd been promoted because I was technically good at something. I could put those parcels in the right part of the plane or in the right destination, so they promoted me into the call center, and I could find the missing parcel there, so they promoted me again, and this kept happening. And then they put me in charge of people, and there were times when I felt really inspired to do things differently, but I think it took me about 15 to 20 years before I'm going to say I had the courage and I guess the grace to feel uncomfortable to do something a bit differently to what I'd done before. So I think for that, it really only happened around about 12 years ago in my very last role I was at Australia Post at the time. I decided that I asked myself a question, which was, what would happen if I treated my people like human beings? Very simple question. I then jotted some things down on an A3 sheet, which I've actually kept now and have in a frame, because it was really the start of my business. And I think what got me to there was what I call the combination of relentless optimism that things could change over 20 years and the brutal realism that they weren't changing, and that maybe I needed to be a bit of a circuit breaker in that. And I think as I got older, I'll be really honest, I became a bit of a rebel and a bit of a maverick, and I wanted to break the system. And so I decided to try something different. And that's what started me to do that. But all along the way, I felt like there was a better way. I just didn't have the courage to go there until I guess the later years in my corporate career.
I know, Mark, when we spoke a few weeks ago before this interview, we talked about shedding identities, and that the realisation I think that sometimes you get to in a corporate career in particular. And by the sounds of it, with the response you've just given us, it sounds like there was a little bit of a shedding of an identity, perhaps, and a little bit of a coming into your own and owning it. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. So I say there were two very, very distinct marks in my corporate career. I refer to them as bad Mark and then good Mark. And bad Mark was the 20-something who was promoted way beyond his level of competence because he was technically good at things and ended up in roles managing other people and managed them like I call units of labour. Like they were just there to hit the targets, make me look good, make sure that I got my bonus. I had a very, very deliberate strategy to get to a certain title, which was going to build my identity before I got to 30, and that was estate manager. And so I got to that, but I got to that, I would say, using tactics and behaviours that would say that would be less than favourable to what I teach people today. So I didn't mind who I climbed over. I didn't mind if I was putting myself out in front, taking the credit for the work that others did. So, that was that identity of you need to be successful, you need to stand up in the system, and this is the way the system works. And then further down the track, it was very, very different to that. It was this idea of what happens if I treat my people like humans. So almost, if you think of something shedding its skin, there's a very long process of 15 or so years to shed that skin. And that's where I got to in the end, which I think, and I still think I'm shedding some of that identity skin because I think I suffer from that still, but it's very, very different identity to the one that I was back then. In fact, some people would not be able to believe it was the same person.
Yeah. That's interesting because that whole shedding the skin, I guess, metaphor, it's almost like we harden. We harden the skin when we go into certain professions and industries, and then that beautiful analogy of then having to shed that. It's almost that, being born again process almost, and really moving into who you are meant to be in life. So I love that about your story. Mark, in your books, you challenge the 100-year-old people management system, and you really provoke humans to do more being before doing, by embracing humanovation, and that's a term that you coined, by starting with this simple phrase, today I choose to be ... Where did this thinking come from, and more specifically, where did this today I choose to be come from?
Okay, let me two parts to that, the 100-year-old system and the challenging of the system. I mentioned before about the system rewards us for being technically good at things, so it didn't really take into account the human element, sell parcels, become the sales manager, or whatever it might have been. So one of the things I started to wonder was that what if there was a better way to find the next generation of people managers and it wasn't based around technical competence? In fact, the question I ask people is, did anyone ever ask you if you wanted to manage other people? And no, the old system didn't allow for that. It just assumed that when you got successful, you would want to take on those roles. So what I wanted to challenge, and if you think about it like this, if we had a 100-year-old house and we didn't rewire that house and we bought it and we were going to renovate it, there's a fair chance that the rewiring would at some stage spark and catch on fire. We've worked with a 100-year-old system in management, which has been sparking for a long time and is catching fire. And that happens in the way of, poor engagement, demotivation, attrition, and these things. And what I wanted to look at is how could we rewire the system and rewire the managers within the system? And one of the elements of that was what I called humanovation. And yeah, it's a made up word. It came about from the work that I did as good Mark. I remember my very last team, we were sitting around, it was a high-end sales team. And so we were sitting around talking about the business, and we usually would say things like it's going to be a tough year and we've got a stretch goal and all the things we know that we hear. And they're sort of like the KPIs, the sales KPIs. And what I did at the time is I said to the team that let's stop thinking about what we're going to do and think about how we're going to choose to be. And that's where humanovation came from. And and creating what we called a to-be list. So not just having a to-do list, but complementing it with a to-be list. So I'm going to choose to be engaged today. I'm doing this. I'm going to choose to be engaged. I'm going to choose to be present. Because I think if we think about what we're going to choose to be, the doing happens a lot better. And the 4 things we focused on being in the first 3 months, which I think had a really significant impact because we practiced humanization, was thankfulness, helpfulness, care, and fun. So they're not your usual KPIs. I'm sure you'd agree to that. They're not what we'd usually look at, but because we focused on the behaviours, what then happened was the things that we started to do got better and more quality because we made a very, very conscious decision on how we're going to choose to be at any particular time. And that could be from one meeting to the next, from 1 hour to the next, from one moment to the next, being more aware of not just what you're doing, but how you're choosing to be.
I love that, because often we do get caught into, in the doing versus the being, and particularly in leadership programs, by the time someone gets to, that point in their career where they're managing people, we then try and, I guess, rewire almost all those things which are generally around behaviours, communication, different practices around behaviours. So there is strength in, making sure that we get people to be acknowledging that early on in their career and even through their formative years around education. So then we're not having to almost relearn that stuff when we get into those management years.
I think there's a lot to be said for and introducing this at the formative years of education. Having come from that space, I think that I have the great pleasure once a year to speak to 43 grade 5 kids at a school just out of Melbourne on thinking about leadership as an activity or as a verb and not as a title. And you would be really surprised at how much they understand about what leadership really is. But then what happens is we go through the system that sort of knocks it out of us.
Yep. And
then we try and help people to bring that back. And I think if we could start that process earlier, we'd be in a lot better space.
Mark, your T-shirt there, I think it says "Provoking with Purpose," if I've remembered that correctly. You've got quite an impressive collection of T-shirts. Every time I see you, I'm very interested in what the slogan is. Can you talk to us a little bit about what was the idea behind the T-shirts and branding them in that way? And are they all your slogans?
They're not all mine. Most of them are. There's a couple. There's one I like in particular, which is a phrase coined by a strong mentor of mine by the name of Marty Linsky, and it's "What's your part in the mess?" So I really like that one. There's the "Today I choose to be," "Hold your nerve." There's this one. So why do I have these? I actually think there's a lot to be said in becoming more of a human leader by practicing curiosity. And one of the things I deliberately wear these for is people get curious. They see something written on my shirt and they're like, what does that mean? So I'm happy to give them a few little bits about what it means, but I'd rather say to them, what does it mean to you? And so the whole idea of the purposeful provocation and these different T-shirts is I actually want people just not to always be thinking of the obvious and then getting a few layers down into that and going, well, if Mark's got a T-shirt on that says "Go first," what does that mean? What does that mean in respect to leadership? And I have a view that, the greatest act of leadership is to go first. So start to think about it in that context. I want people to become more curious and maybe step away from some of the traditional jargon that we hear in the leadership space that, I think has been tainted so much that they need to think a bit differently. So curiosity is a big part of that.
Yeah, wonderful.
And Mark, with the just on the specific topic of leadership, you obviously work from a coaching perspective, but also with corporates. How do you, in terms of fearlessness and courage, when you say it, what does that look like?
Yeah, this is a great question. Can I start by answering it a little bit differently? I think it's more important to understand or get a sense of how it feels. So what does it feel like rather than what does it look like? Because I think leadership as an activity creates feeling. Like we can observe something and we can see something, but it's how it makes you feel, which is where I think it starts. And I think this is part of the human piece, is bringing more of our, how did you feel when you saw George demonstrate that act of leadership? When you saw George speak up in that meeting and was courageous, it's going to hit you below the neck first. You're going to feel it first. So I think I'd like to think about how do people feel when they see great leadership and great acts of leadership. And then if I think about what does it look like, I say everything from a moment of madness where you just think, what happened just then? Like, what, we've never seen that before. Why did they do that? To someone being really inspired, or you can see people almost rising up in their seats, or if they're standing around or whatever it would be. What else does it look like? It actually looks, I think it looks risky and dangerous at times. Like when true leadership happens, I'm not talking about when people put themselves at some sort of risk in order to make progress. You can see some things there and you're like, that's almost like a no-go zone for me. So I'd see it that way. There can be fierce debate and disagreement. I think sometimes we try and temper that fierce debate and disagreement because we think that it means that a team's not working well. But I think in teams where there's a high degree of leadership happening, we should see fierce debate and disagreement. And these things, again, will make people uncomfortable. I would also say on top of that, I would also see, even in that fierce debate, respectful dialogue. So it's being done in a very respectful way. It's being done to serve the group and not to serve the individual. And the other one I'm going to say is the combination of curiosity. I see curiosity because people are wanting to be more curious about what's going on. And I see composure as well. Like, great leadership usually is not people shouting from the rooftops. It's more composed, considered and delivered well. So they're the things. But I would really say that I'd stress to people to think about how did you feel when you observed it, rather than going straight into the visual of what we saw there.
And it goes beyond the behaviour. And again, to your point, people long remember how they felt when they experienced a really good leader compared to what they said specifically as well. I think I'm probably plagiarising a famous quote there by saying that. But if we shift our attention now to trust, and trust underpins your model, and I really like the analogy of the 100-year-old house that needs to be rewired. So when we think about trust and we think about rewiring managers, I'm going to draw on one of my favourite quotes about trust, which is, trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. How can leaders build trust sustainably? Okay,
so let's go back to that house. And in my first book, I basically have the picture of the house, and the foundation of the house is trust. So if all of these things are going to help people to rewire to human, they've got to start with a foundation that is going to be solid enough to withstand the test of the old system coming in to try and knock it off its balance. So how does that look for a manager, for a leader, for anyone in an organisation? I think we have to reimagine what trust is. And I'll go back to bad Mark and good Mark. Bad Mark said that I will trust you when you give me a reason to trust you, when you demonstrate that you are capable of doing something. In brackets, make me look good. To good Mark, who said, you don't have to gain my trust, you have to lose it. So I actually started to trust implicitly. Now, I'm also going to say this was really hard to do, because my lizard brain was telling me that people aren't trustworthy, and if they don't do the right thing, you're going to look like a fool. So I had to fight an old mindset that was built over many years, that trust was about having people's backs. It was about, and not about whether they were capable of doing things. So my idea in the book and in the model is that managers need to start with a couple of things. One is very, very clearly communicating to their people that they trust, that they turn up with good intention to do good work. And you need to then back that up by your actions, so you don't go, throwing them under the bus if they get one thing wrong. And then the second part of that was a really, really simple conversation with that group of people around what I called your trust killers. What would be the thing that would break trust or kill trust for you within a group? And there are three components to this, which I'll very quickly share. The first one is motive, and that's about, do I have your back? The second one is capability. Can you do your job? And then the third one is reliability. Do you do what you say you will? And simply by asking each of my people which one of those was the most important to them, that it wasn't broken, I got a really good sense from each individual how they viewed trust. And I wasn't there to debate them about which one was right. It was just to get a sense of understanding that if for you, Rita, motive was important, that I had your back, then I had to be really aware of how I behaved around that thing. So I think sharing some dialogue with your people and your team about what trust means to them, rather than just saying we have to trust each other. I think it's really important that we get into a conversation around understanding what trust means to each individual in the team.
And Mark, can you talk about the evolution of managers, and if we look at the 2020 has served us up, how does that need to evolve beyond 2020 for managers and leaders? What's that going to look like moving forward to continue to be relevant and to continue to be, a human leader?
Yeah. So let me just say that we have had quite the year served up, and one of the things I noticed early is how quickly we did adapt to embracing the human element. So when you notice people working from home, and all of a sudden we could see what was going on at home, people were starting to spend time on talking about how you're feeling. Hey, I noticed you've got a dog, or you've got a cat, or you've got this and your kids. And so all of a sudden, which was really interesting, I sort of think to myself, why did it take a pandemic for us to start to become more human from a work perspective? So I'm going to say this, it's in us. We've got it in us. How do we keep this evolving so we don't lose it and go back to something else? Humanovation is really important there. That idea of starting with, being before doing. We're human beings that have become human doing. So as a manager, thinking about how you choose to turn up to every interaction you have with another human is a starting point. That awareness that you build, I think, is a start point. The really, really challenging one around the evolution is the work starts with you. The work starts with self. I'm a big believer that we've done too much work on management and leadership development on teaching people how to manage outwards without managing back inwards. So the really, really hard work in the evolution is to turn that mirror around and spend about 70% of your time looking back at yourself. In order to take that next step to team, you've got to discover what your part in the mess is and what you're prepared to do to change the way that you turn up so that others can benefit. The other one is treat yourself like an experiment. So I think we're all our biggest experiments, and it's depending upon running safe experiments, running bold experiments, whatever we want to do. But, I suggest that you run little safe experiments to test yourself out, take yourself out of your comfort zone, and continue to work on yourself as an experiment, because when your people see you experimenting on yourself and changing, they're likely to mirror that as they do mirroring good or bad behaviours. And the other one I want to say in evolution is, I think moving around industries, I think now that there's been a lot of jobs lost and whatnot, building your transferable skills, what they call your soft skills, I love to call your human skills, is being bold enough to back yourself to change industries and maybe start to break that cycle that says that if you're not from here, you can't manage people. Building those great management skills, so that you could go from, I was in logistics, I could potentially move into another totally different industry because my evolution had been around my transferability rather than a very, very technically based skill set.
Mark, you talk about that mirror, which you mentioned before. What's the best way for individuals to, turn that mirror around and look at what they're presenting, how they're leading? What's the best way to do that?
Take a deep breath to start with, because that's where it starts. It's like you've got to be you've got to be prepared to see things that you don't want to see. So this takes a lot of courage. This is not easy work, and I know this with my clients that I work with, that I use the immunity to change process, the Keegan and Lisa Lay process, and you can see it in a particular point in time when they're really getting deep into it. They're seeing things that they don't like, and so the way to turn that around is you need to be courageous. You need to be prepared to have conversations with yourself and with others and get some feedback that you're not going to like to hear. And then I think the other side of it is understanding this, that the game of human is a long game. And because we live in a world today which wants immediate gratification, whether it's social media, whatever it might be, in your development and your adaptation doesn't happen overnight. Adaptation happens gradually. So the other thing I'd say is for people to take a mindset into this work that, the version of Mark that left corporate 6 years ago is different to the version of Mark today, which will be different again to the version of Mark in 6 years' time. And they're incremental adaptive steps from looking into a mirror. And the other thing I would say is when you see some of those things in the mirror that you don't like, don't be too harsh a critic on yourself, because we are very good at that too. And the other one is, I've just come off a session earlier today with someone saying, remember there's things that you're doing well too. So you've got to continue to celebrate that. But it's the hardest work, and I think it's the most rewarding work, but we tend to practice what we call the skillful art of work avoidance on this stuff, because it's no one wants to do it because it sort of blows you up a bit, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. It's the hard stuff too, and we do try and maybe we don't intentionally avoid it, but it's the hard stuff, and it's the easiest thing to drop on the priority list until there's a burning platform that says we have to move into that hard stuff.
And just on that quickly, just usually that when it's the burning platform, we're sort of starting to get to the point where it's starting to get a little bit late to be able to do some of that stuff too. So, getting into it early and being courageous is a good way to be.
Yeah, and I guess always being open to it too, being always open to the feedback, being vulnerable enough to ask others for feedback. I know that, Mark, in the book you've talked about, being more human, and I absolutely agree with you that you don't learn how to be human from a textbook. And in fact, if I think about my career, those moments of vulnerability and really shedding the corporate identity have increased my ability to demonstrate more humanness, if that's a term that can be used, because it's authentic and it comes out and it's not filtered and it's not about being someone that you need to be. One question that's come through just on that same topic though, around I guess moving into your own space, being vulnerable. One question that's come up in the live chat is, or it's really rather a comment, Janine has said, we're not all wanting to manage people and it's okay not to want to lead people. Based on that comment, why do you think that it's easier for some rather than others to form that connection, to build high-performing teams and really to optimise what they can get out of their team?
Yeah, virtual hug for Janine wherever she is, because that's a great comment. Why is it easier for some people? Because some people just have a passion for that work. They want to be the person out the front that's helping to help others to develop. One of the reasons I got into school teaching was really around that passion. I don't think there's anything more rewarding than helping people to learn and grow. But that's just one type of person. And then you have another person who's technically very good at stuff and is horrified by the fact they might have to manage other people. The challenge we have is we don't have a pathway for that second person, because our system promotes their technical competence until they put them into a role that they really don't want. So why is it that some people have it? I think it's passion. What can we do about it? I think we've got to ask the question more of our people and say, before we assume they want that promotion into people management, we've got to ask them that question I said before, is do you actually want to manage another human being? And the amount of people I ask that to who say they've never been asked that question tells me that this is why we need to rewire the system. We need to find a way. So maybe for someone in that situation where they're technically competent but they don't want to manage a team, maybe what might light their fire is to be able to mentor some people coming through and to share their experience with them to help them to grow and develop. But they don't want the added burden of, the one-to-ones and the performance reviews and all of those other things. So we need to actually find another pathway for the technically competent people who don't want to manage others to go there. We won't find that out unless we ask the question. And, I know I'm talking to two people who love the people stuff, but I also know a lot of people who are terrified by it. So we need to understand not everyone wants to go the same way.
Absolutely, and having managed large teams in the past, I'd be the first one to say though that there's also a lot of merit in not having to manage large teams. It's hard work. I was speaking to someone yesterday that said I manage a team of 11, and it feels like I've got 11 more children, and not because he was disparaging the team that he manages, but it's hard work, and it's psychologically it's hard work. You're carrying a lot of that care and welfare of the team. So completely understand it's a tough job. Mark, you've been quoted as saying the world of work needs you to be human. What do you mean by that?
Yep. So if we go back to our hard wiring, and I think about a couple of things here. First one is what is it that we want as human beings? First thing is a sense of safety. As a survival species, you want to feel a sense of safety. All right. Where does safety come from? And if I think in a anthropological way, it's like deep connection. We are a social species. So to be more human is first of all is to embrace building deep connection. So, for instance, we met in another country, but we are still connected. We haven't spoken for a while, but we keep in touch through following social media and things like that. We will start to find out we've got things in common. So I think that's the starting point. Being more human is about understanding that there are two parts of work. There's the technical work and then there's the human work, and we need to bring them both together. We don't do the human work when we've got a bit of a break from our, the other real work, as we call it. Once I've done the real work, I'll do the human work. Deep connection is the first part. The second part is, and for every human, and these are, I guess my 4 words that my business runs by, is making every human belong. It's creating that sense of belonging, so that, as simple as this, allowing an individual in an organisation to understand why they're relevant and how they contribute as an individual into a team, into a department, into an organisation. There's nothing more rewarding for a human being to know that as one entity, as one part of the system, they have been able to contribute to the overarching, strategic intent. So that's what I mean by being more human. It's like getting back to, let's build connection, let's build a sense of belonging, allowing people to feel safe. And the other one is we are a sense-making species, so we've got to spend more time in helping people to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Because if we don't, our brains start going in 100 different directions about what's going on when it's probably a long way from the truth. So humanness, connection, belonging, and then we get into things like, as a manager, be vulnerable. Tell people you don't know. I don't know the answer. Can you help me? The thankfulness I talked about before, being helpful, caring for people. And the other one I threw in those 4 was having fun. Like, make work fun, because we liked having a lot of fun when we were young, when we were growing up, and we sort of lose that in the seriousness of work. So I think those things would be what being human or making work human means to me.
Mark, just picking up on some of those points as well, particularly when you've got, that expectation, of someone in the team, and if they don't have that line of sight on how their behaviour can influence an outcome or how their behaviour impacts individuals around them, then they're pretty much flying blind during that time. You talk about that human-to-human connection, and if we look at the realities of 2020, we've got remote working, we've got remote leadership, and we've also got the impact on productivity and the impact on how we connect with our broader organisation and colleagues. How can managers build that deep human-to-human connection with their team members, and what are some of the tips given the current environment?
Yep. So I think the first thing to do is let's not hide behind that there's now a reason why we can't do it.
Yes.
Because we're not with the people. Like, we're connected here now and in a virtual environment. There's a connection happening here. So the first thing is to stop telling yourself the story that it's really going to be difficult to do. And I know I fell for that when things went bad in March and I'm thinking about my business, what's going to happen. What can we do? The first thing we've got to do is we've actually got to, or managers should, allocate formal time for this connection activity. Like, allocate time in your week where you're not doing anything but talking about things like we used to do with my team, like possums in the roof and dragon boat racing and your footy team, or going on a holiday, whatever it might be. Don't have it as a bit of you have them as little side conversations as well, but put time in the diary for just not technical work related work. This is our human work time. This is our deep connection time. Build that time into your diary. And then the second thing I'll say is don't cancel it because something urgent comes up, because that's what causes the spark in the wiring that burns the house down. That's the first thing. Second thing I'd say is I have I came up with, they're very, very simple questions. I came up with 5 questions. If you want to build deep connection at a one-to-one level initially, and this can be with long-term employees who you haven't had the conversation with, or for short-term, new employees, there were 5 questions that I penned, and I sent them to my people and said, could you come and tell me your story on these 5 questions? And the questions are, the first one is, what do you expect of me? So that's about creating some sort of equality between us around behaviours, not around hierarchy. The second question was about what's your work style preference? And what I mean by that is when the conditions are absolutely right for you and you can do your best work and thrive, what's it like? Do you want me to leave you be? Do you want me to micromanage you? Most people say no to that. It's like, how do I get my best work done? The third question is, how do you get balance in your life? So getting a sense of what are you doing outside of work to keep balance? Because I think it's really important that we get that right, that life design piece. The fourth question is, what does great leadership look like? So looking at more as an activity and not a title. And then the last question is about your values. So what are your 3 most important values? And I guarantee you, and this isn't just from my experiment with doing this with my own team, but in the last 6 years, the most feedback I get from people who come and work with me is when I've used those 5 questions, the connection I've been able to make with my people has been has gone so deep and built so quickly than by just spending a bit of time. So I think those first 5 questions would be a great place, but you've got to make the time to do that. I think that's how you build connection, and letting your people know that is work. That's part of work.
Mark, very early in my career, when I had the opportunity to lead people and organising the one-on-ones, because that's what my leaders did with me, I fell into the trap of exactly what you spoke about there. Something urgent has popped up, they'll understand. And it's that simple act of, 15 minutes to go and you've sent an email to someone in the team to say, hey, so-and-so has popped up, can we reschedule, or we'll just catch up next week? Or let me know if you've got any questions. I didn't realise at the time the impact that had on them. Trustworthy individuals, they trusted me, but the message I was sending to them is that the stuff that pops up urgently is far more important than you sitting down and actually listening to what's happening in my world. So a lot of what you're sharing here is absolutely hitting me in between the eyeballs in terms of my early leadership experience.
Just quickly on that, the word important is so critical here. It simply means that you're not as important as something else.
Yes.
So I'm sure plenty of people would hear this and they would be having the same experience that you've had. We've all done it.
Yeah. We've got some questions that have come via the chat function. This one's bringing up one of the earlier topics. How hard was it to move from the to-do list to the to-be list?
It's still hard now because we are, so this is like so very, very difficult. This is something that you need to practice. On my website, there's actually an editable, what's called a humanivation sheet, and people can go on there and they can literally use that each day, and it asks them to pick a word. Today I choose to be, and then it has a to-be list and a to-do list that they can fill in every day. That would be a good way for them to practice it. For me, I still get caught up in, I find myself doing stuff before I've made the choice of how I'm going to be still. So the other part with that is just to build your awareness of when you first go to start the day. How am I going to choose to be? So it's really challenging because we tend to chase the things we get measured on, and that's usually what we do. Yeah. But before we start to do stuff, we should choose how we're going to be. So you've got to wrestle with yourself every day on this one, just to check in on yourself, I think. It's a great question.
And we've got a comment from Richard, which I'll read directly from the screen here. You can't reflect and develop if you're putting out fires. Not burning to death is all that will occupy your attention. So
absolutely. That's, and this is your ability to get above the noise and maybe above the flames there is part of that idea of how you choose to be. Like choosing to be reflective each day, giving you that chance just to reflect and go, well, what did happen yesterday? What challenged me yesterday? What did I learn yesterday? Did I have an aha moment yesterday? Like, I think that's what helps to put the flames out, but we find it difficult to do that for sure.
And Richard actually has another question in here for you, Mark. How do you persuade people to embrace slowness and reflection in a fast-moving VUCA world?
Embrace it by starting with something that is a bite-sized chunk. So let's say, you know what we're going to do for 5 minutes today? We're going to stop and reflect on one question. And then we're going to build that over time. And, we might get to 10 minutes. And I think 10 minutes is plenty of time to do it. Don't try and bring this in and sort of solve it and be great at it and expert at it very, very quickly. Do it over time. So I'd say to Richard is bite-sized chunks. Pick one question each day. I love the question of what am I curious about from yesterday, or what challenged me yesterday? Reflect on that for 5 minutes, take some notes, share it within your group. I think that's the best place to start. And the other thing we've got to be careful of, I got to say, is getting wound up in the story of VUCA. If we want the world to be VUCA, it will be VUCA. That's what we do. But we create stories, and if it's fast-paced and ambiguous and volatile, well, that's what I'm going to walk into every day unless I choose to be another way.
Okay.
Spot on.
Now, we have a customary tradition, and the tradition goes back to 8 a.m. this morning, by the way, Mark. So they've got to start somewhere, of course. But we've got a tradition with all the impactologists. We ask them a series of questions to end off the chat. And the first question for you is, you are on a video call with your 18-year-old self. What advice would you provide young Mark?
Don't be such a idiot in your early part of your career. Listen more to people. Be curious. That life is a long game, not a short game, and be conscious about who you're stepping over on the way through, because they just might catch up with you on the way along the pathway. Would be some of the things I'd think about. I think I'd say that giving trust is a really important thing to do. Just trust that people turn up with good reason. And the other thing I'd say is be kind to yourself. Celebrate the things that you do well, and don't get caught up in all of the bad news stories. Every now and again, even if it's a small celebration, make sure you celebrate it.
The don't be harsh on yourself has emerged a couple times today. And finally, we're going to play a game of word association. So I'll say a word, and the first word that comes into mind. Don't worry, you don't need to sit on a couch. It's all friendly. Robots.
Mechanical.
Leadership.
Activity.
Innovation.
Buzzword.
Family.
Everything.
Humanovation.
buzzword.
I was hoping you weren't going to say that. I threw over, I
You know
passed
what? I've
over
got
the
to be
line.
honest. It is like, oh, well, you know what I'm going to say? Invented. I'm going to give you more. Invented by a brilliant human. There you go.
There you
Yeah,
go. I
better.
like that.
That's better.
That's got a bit more currency now. Trust.
The foundation.
2020.
Reset.
I'd say.
Reset. Recharge. Reflect. Yeah.
I'd say.
There's a few R words.
I'd say an unsubscribe to that one. And 2021.
Opportunity.
Wonderful. Mark, thoroughly enjoyed the chat today. And I've written down some further thoughts and questions for myself as well. Thank you so much. You put such a potentially complex topic really simply. So thank you so much for your time and joining us today at Impactology Live.
Look, I really appreciate it, and well done for you two putting this on. I know how much effort this takes, and I think you're doing a great service to humans around the world, so thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Mark.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great afternoon.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very
See ya.
much.
Cheers. We are at 1:45 to the hour, so we have 15 minutes for our next interview, which is going to be with Sue Briley. Sue Briley is the author of Lioness and is the adoptive mother of Saru, who millions of us have seen in the movie Lion. So 15 minutes, take a breather, and we'll see you soon.